Luoyan. In the early years of the Qing dynasty, there was a family in Jinghai, Tianjin, surnamed Shao, whose male owner died at an early age. Only his son, Xiao Dao, and his wife, Fang, were left to live on. As a young boy, Xiao Dao's mother would often work in the fields, leaving him to tumble through the fields with books. Young men, watching his mother's toil, thought to themselves that they should live a good life without attribution. By the time she was able to enroll, her mother sent him to private school. She hoped that her son would make a difference. As Xiao Dao grew up, his mother, Fang, grew old day by day. Because of working in the fields for years and years, Fang fell many sick roots. From Xiao Dao's 14 days, it was difficult for him to get out of his bed. He could only do some sewing work on his bed to subsidize his family's living, so the family's livelihood fell to Xiao Dao. Xiao Dao was filial and devoted to his mother's birthday every year. Although the family was poor, Xiao Dao occasionally wrote letters for others to earn silver and save them for her mother's birthday. Although she said she didn't have to do it every year, her heart was still warm. Mr. Xiao has a habit of paying homage to Yin Wang every year for his mother's birthday, even if it's worth extending her life with his own. With February 15th this year, Xiao Dao's family was in a state of limbo, and even his livelihood was in question. But how could his mother's birthday be? Xiao Dao remembered his mother plowing in the sunset, but he was bitterly upset, bit his teeth and borrowed money. Mr. Xiao borrowed all his friends and neighbors to celebrate his mother's 60th birthday this year. Your 60th birthday this year, Mom. Although your son can't hire many people, he can still do a good job for you. Fang's son is excited to come out of this. The previous year's harvest was not good. The families were already very sad. They didn't have much surplus food. How can they get money for their own birthday party? She knew her son must have borrowed money again for filial piety, and she couldn't blame him for laughing silly, just smiling gently and stroking his face. On February 15th, Xiao Dao bought the fish from Shishuangtang, the chicken from Chen Guantan, the duck from Yangqing, and 5 caddies of good pork belly. Knowing that his mother liked the carving of Shaoxing, Xiao Dao went to the winery to make a half caddies of carving wine. He thought his mother would love the carving if she saw it. So Xiao Dao came home to start the birthday party. His mother sat in his room sewing clothes for him, and from time to time she could smell the aroma of the food floating in the kitchen. Her mother, Guaner, laughed warmly, but she still cared for her son. How could she learn the credit for not only breaking the expenses but also worrying about his birthday party? At noon, Xiao Dao served the food on the table, brought over the statue of the 10-temple High Lord and placed it in the middle of the table. Xiao Dao set up the incense stove and knelt on the table, offering silent prayers in the hope that his mother would be able to go down soon and that her life would last for 100 years. With his eyes closed and his head percussed, Xiao Dao was instantly blindsided as he prepared to insert incense into the oven, and the food on the table disappeared without trace. Mr. Xiao hastily interspersed the incense and, believing he had forgotten to serve it out of the kitchen, hurried back to see the pile of wood piling up in the corner of the wall as well as the cooking hobs that had been stir-fry. Mr. Xiao thought he had a good look at it, and rushed from the kitchen to the courtyard's supply table, where all but plates left were statues and furnaces. Xiao Dao panicked for a while, and his toil over his mother's birthday dinner vanished. His heart was not in the food but in the fact that this year's mother's birthday dinner could not be fulfilled, and he began to howl, howling with sadness. Her mother heard Xiao Dao crying so sadly in her room. She shouted, "Tower, what's going on? What's the matter with you?" Xiao Dao didn't respond, but the tears got worse. Fang was in a hurry, so she couldn't help but get out of bed and see what was going on. She slipped and fell out of bed. With my mother's ouch, Mr. Xiao hurried into the indoors to help his mother back to bed, where he knelt and cried, "Ma, children are not filial." The child only paid tribute to the king of Yan. The thief who came from nowhere immediately swept away the items of the birthday banquet. "Ma'am." Fang wrapped him in his arms and stroked his head, comforting him. "It's okay. It's no big deal. I can't eat much in bed. They took the meals. It's their birthdays." "Don't cry. Mom knows what you mean. I'm not going to look at him," she said. smiling as her mother looked at him on the ridge. As Xiao Tao sobbed and his body jerked, he took a long time to recover. Helpless, he had to celebrate his birthday with porridge and oligodon. While eating, Xiao Tao was still heartbroken. Even after eating, he started to cry. His mother reprimanded him. "Tori, what's the use of crying? When this is over, you just have to study hard and take credit. And you won't cry over a meal." "But Mom, that's yours. Stop it, eat well and then read. Stop thinking about it." As soon as Xiao Tao put up with it, he went back to his room to study. Bloom to and take one watch from each other. After Xiao Tao returned to his room, his mother's side muttered, in broad daylight, "How could a burglar not steal gold and silver, but steal a potluck meal instead? I would not have come up with such a stupid idea if I had my head kicked by a donkey." So there's only one possibility, that the son is lying. Presumably, the family was too poor to have a birthday party, so Xiao Tao deliberately brought her a restaurant meal to smell it, then sent it back, finally telling herself that it had been stolen. Fang thought that, sadly, his son died soon after he was born, and he didn't have a good life growing up. How can he be deceived by his filial piety? It wasn't long before news came that the master would be presiding over the examination and the chance to claim his credit came. Xiao Tao was full of confidence, but also sad-looking, because his family had few funds, and had already owed a lot of money to extend his life to his mother. So Xiao Tao was tempted to give up, but how could his mother give up? She said, "If you study for many years, you can't afford to lose a single word of money. How can you stand up to your father's spirit in heaven? Isn't that money? I'll borrow it." When Xiao Tao got on his knees and said, "Mom, son knows it's wrong, son goes." Xiao Tao brazenly borrowed some more silver from the neighbors, wrote an IOU, entrusted his mother to the neighbors, and set off. On this day, Xiao Tao walked to a small village in Langfang and suddenly saw a man sitting down on the road ahead. He greeted him from a distance, fearing that he was a thief, and trembled forward. He watched as people in front of him waved at him and asked, "Brother, why don't you go to Beijing and take the exam?" Mr. Xiao replied, "Is it true that Your Excellency is also in attendance? So am I. I'm a little tired to be here, so take a break, and just in case I see you, why don't we go together and have a little help?" Hello, brother. Your name?" "In Xiao Wuguan, a person from Wujiechuang, Rugao, Jiangsu Province." "Your Excellency?" "In Xiao Tao, people from Jinghai, Tianjin." "Wu brothers, I think you'll have to hurry tonight. There's no hotel in the middle of nowhere. My brother didn't know that there was a manor in front of me that was my relative's house, and we walked to it." Looking in the direction of Wu Guanzi, Xiao Tao certainly saw a large house with bright lights. He remembers not seeing the house round him earlier, and how could it not be obvious that such a large house was so bright and golden? With curiosity, he entered the house with the martial arts. It's a beautiful house, and there's poetry to prove it. The golden oaks, the amber wall, the lights, the daylight maids. The fish scene is like the sea, even Shenfu has no bright side. As Xiao Tao stared, not knowing where to put his hands and feet, he stared in the courtyard, looking out at the gleaming courtyard. "You're flashed by the gold in this courtyard," Wu joked at the sight of him. "Disrespectful?" Mr. Xiao hastily apologized. "I was just thinking about how happy my mother would be if she could see this." "Ha ha, brother's mother. It's better not to see them." "What does that mean, brother?" "Ha ha ha. Nothing. Don't take it personally. Let me go and visit my uncle." Wu Guan led Xiao Tao to a temple, and Xiao Tao wondered why the house was temple style, a building that only the royal family could build, and Wu Guan's uncle dared to do so for fear of death. Inside, Xiao Tao saw Wu Guan's uncle, who was gracious and kind, vaguely king but dignified but not vicious. "My uncle gave thou a ticket and served him delicacies." "Old man Lu Dai, the slaves were hungry when he passed through your house earlier this day, so he disturbed you to eat," said Mr. Lu. After listening to Xiao Tao, the two monks can't fill their minds. Have you ever seen Wu Guan's uncle? Why is he bothering himself? But since the other person said it, it's not easy for him to ask too much about the big families. or not to know too much. As Xiao Tao looked at the table before him, he burst into tears and choked up. My uncle asked Xiao Tao why he was crying, and Xiao Tao replied, "My uncle didn't know that my mother borrowed money from others to buy a birthday banquet for my mother on her previous birthdays. When I knew that there was a burglar when I worshipped my mother, the meal suddenly turned into a blank one. I didn't know where my mother was, so my mother had to clear away porridge during her lifetime. How can I eat my mother's hard life at home?" She said Xiao Tao was howling and she fainted. Xiao fainted and dreamed that he was still sitting in the palace, but the difference was that there were no servants round. And Wu Guan did not know where he had gone, leaving only his uncle sitting opposite him, who was sitting in the palace. Mr. Xiao found the son familiar. "Xiao Tao, did you forget that I was invited to your house on your mother's birthday?" "You are, Mr. Yan." Xiao Tao was stunned, and he could not believe that the person in front of him was Lord Yan. He suddenly kneeled down and kowtowed to him, and trembled. "Cowman, Xiao Tao has violated Lord Yan." He continued, "If you are not respectful of him, please punish him. But my mother is at no fault. I hope Lord Yan will prolong my life for my mother." "Xiao Tao, I am Yan Luono, for Wu Guan, Wang Lu Dai. I have no charge over my life, but your mother is in my prison. She will die 2 days after you leave home. Would you like to take a look? Please have my grandpa be happy and let me see my mother." Wu Guanwang took Xiao Tao through the blood-soaked halves of Xiao Tao to the hell of boiling soup, and through the horrible hell of peeling, to the hell of tongue pulling. Wu Guanwang pointed away to Xiao Tao, who saw the fang's tongue burn through their mother's mouth with a red-hot iron hook, then pulled out as hard as he could to pull out the whole tongue. Mr. Xiao could not help but look at the scene, and he kneeled on his knees and shouted, "Mom, stop shouting. She can't hear you," Wu Guanwang said coldly. As Xiao Tao sobbed, he turned around on his knees, ripped the corner of the king and choked up. "Lord Yan, please let my mother go. Let me carry this sin, please let her go," he said. "Alas, you mortals, it is your mother's sin to reprimand you for this result. If you really want to replace your mother, sign this deed." Without hesitation, Xiao Tao signed off, and soon 2 inmates dragged him down to a tongue-pulling inferno, this time to watch from outside. One took his hair out and stepped on his thigh to get him on his knees and raised his head, while the other cracked open his mouth, grabbed a red-hot iron hook and stretched it deep into his throat, listening only to the sound of bayonet, with Xiao Tao violently. Not far away, my mother saw this scene. Her feet softened and she cried, tears streaming down the corner of her eyes, her voice exhausted and unable to shout anymore. She slumped on the side of the road looking helplessly at her children, and her heart tightened once the iron hooks clicked. Only then did Mr. Xiao know that his mother could not see the suffering of his children. Mr. Xiao woke up to find himself still in the palace, still surrounded by dogs and bartenders. My uncle looked at him and said, "Little Xiao Tao, are you drunk? You laugh when you're too old to drink." The uncle scattered the crowd, took Xiao Tao to his bedroom and pulled out a bag of silver and told him, "You've been harassing and disrespectful. Please smile." Xiao Tao also did not decline and accepted. Without a dream, Xiao Tao woke up early the next morning and found himself not in a wealthy courtyard, but in a mass grave surrounded by only a few old pagoda trees. Wu Guan did not know where to go. He had a pack of stuff under his head, a little hard, and opened it, all filled with gold. He weighed it, about 5 or 2, so Xiao Tao carried the money on his way to the exam. After the exam, Xiao Tao returned home, and his mother was still alive. Xiao Tao was relieved. He paid back all the money he owed and spent the rest on his mother's services. He still sacrificed the king and gave his mother a big birthday every year until her death at the age of 82. On the evening of your mother's death, he dreamed again of your mother, Wu Guanwang Lu Dai, who said, "The previous sentence to show you to hell was to test your filial piety. Your mother should have given up her 60th birthday, but thanks to your meal, your life was extended for 5 years. And because your mother-in-law, Xiao Shun, has continued for another 17 years, which is no longer viable now. Your mother's gone to Naro for life. She's innocent." A child asked Xiao Tao, "How does it feel to have dinner with Yin Wang?" Mr. Xiao replied, "A man who respects others, God who always respects him."
Alright, this story has come to an end. If you liked it, please give it a thumbs up. Thank you.